Hello everyone, welcome back. Everyday heroism in the Civil War wasn't about waving flags or leading charges. It was sharing your last piece of hardtack, giving someone your only blanket on a freezing night, carrying water under fire because no one else would. These quiet acts kept people alive, but then you step back and realize you're only 18, just a kid in America's bloodiest war. More than 600,000 will die, many of them teenagers who thought this would be an adventure. Some come home missing an arm, some a leg, and plenty never come home at all. Later, you'll meet one boy who lost his leg, patched himself up, and still returned to the front. Apparently, taking a break wasn't part of the plan. Before we dive in, hit like and subscribe to join our global community. Wherever you're watching from, drop your city and your local time in the comments. It's how we turn history into a conversation that belongs to all of us. Headphones on, symmetry achieved, underwear secured. Congratulations, you're officially ready for history, our way. You're wearing the uniform now. It's made of wool, thick enough to keep out the cold, but rough enough to rub your neck raw. The shoes are oversized, probably meant for a farmer with feet twice yours. And the musket, your new best friend, feels more like a fence post than a weapon. You try to look proud, but inside you're already wondering if the recruiter accidentally handed you the extra large package. The posters back in town promised something grand. Drums, flags, and neighbours cheering in the street. They didn't print the part about diarrhea, trench lice, or boots that blistered your skin before you even left the parade ground. That part you're finding out the hard way. The camp is buzzing with people like you, boys who've never been more than a few miles from home. You spot a drummer boy. He's about 14, clutching a drum almost bigger than his chest. His face glows like he's at a festival. You look at him and think, no one explained to him that drums don't block bullets. But he's excited and everyone lets him be. Soldiers are cruel sometimes, but no one wants to crush the drummer boy. Letters get written quickly. Strange considering no one has even fought yet. One man writes to his mother, telling her not to worry. Another scribbles about his sweetheart back home. A third guy asks someone to feed his chickens, because apparently chickens don't pause their needs just because the country is at war. Everyone pretends these letters are casual, but the sweat stains on the paper say otherwise. Your training begins, if you can call it that. Line up, march straight, lift the musket, fire, reload, faster, again. Someone drops their weapon, nearly takes off a toe. The sergeant yells until his voice cracks, and everyone else laughs nervously, not because it's funny, but because it could have been them. Congratulations, you are officially trained. But trained for what? Ask the man next to you while you're fighting, and you might hear, for freedom. Ask another, and he shrugs, because everyone else joined. The truth is, half the men don't fully know why they're here. Patriotism, neighbourly pressure, or maybe just the promise of steady meals. Except the meals are questionable. Camp food arrives in two main categories, hardtack and salted meat. Hardtack is a biscuit so hard you could chip a tooth trying to bite it. Some soldiers break it with the butt of their muskets first. Others soak it in coffee, which makes it less crunchy but still flavourless. And sometimes it comes alive. Worms or beetles crawl out, and the veteran advice is simple. Knock them out, then eat. Protein's protein. Salted meat is the other option, and it smells like regret. Too salty to eat comfortably, but not salty enough to stop it from rotting on hot days. Mix that with beans when you're lucky, and you've got dinner. It's not gourmet, but it's fuel. One man jokes, this is what keeps us fighting. The thought of better food at home. Water is worse. Streams look clear until you realise every horse in camp is standing in them. Drink, and you risk stomach cramps so bad you can't stand. Don't drink, and you collapse from thirst. It's a game you lose either way. But when an officer shouts, you sip, pretend it's fine, and move on. At night, the camp turns into a symphony of noise. Men cough, horses kick, Someone snores so loud, it feels like a cannon firing beside your head. The ground is your mattress, unless you're lucky enough to find straw. It pokes through your clothes, but at least it's softer than mud. A soldier nearby mumbles in his sleep about pie. Everyone else chuckles, half jealous, half wishing they were home. Laughter is rare, but when it comes, it's quick, awkward, and necessary. Because otherwise, it's just silence, and silence feels heavier than any musket. The smell of camp becomes part of you. Unwashed wool, sweat, horse manure, smoke from fires, and something else you don't want to identify. No cologne in the world could cover it. After a few days, you stop noticing, until a new recruit joins and wrinkles his nose. Then you remember. You all stink. The days stretch, slow and heavy. You polish the musket, you drill, you wait. Time doesn't pass normally. Someone tells a joke, someone else sings off key, and for a brief moment, it feels like a group of kids camping. Then the sergeant yells, and the illusion breaks. Still, the strangest part is the mix of fear and excitement. You're terrified of what's coming, but also restless. Like you've signed up for a show and want to see how the curtain rises. The drummer boy taps a rhythm. The men around you grin nervously, and you realise tomorrow is closer than you want it to be. Tomorrow isn't another drill. Tomorrow is war. You're barely settled into camp when the real work begins. Forget the cheering neighbours and waving flags. This is about standing in lines, holding a weapon you can barely manage, and doing it until your arms feel like they might detach from your body. The sergeant is the star of the show. His voice slices through the air before the sun has even risen. You're shoved into formation, shoulder to shoulder, with strangers, and suddenly these strangers are brothers. Not because you like each other, but because if one man drifts, the entire formation collapses. It's a family of inconvenience. "Dress your line," he yells. To an outsider, it sounds like fashion advice. In reality, it means stop sliding out of place. You shuffle your feet, bump into the man next to you, and earn a glare sharp enough to cut wood. A recruit behind mutters, "I thought war was about shooting, not synchronized standing." Nobody laughs too loud, because the sergeant is listening. Then comes the musket. A musket is essentially a long pipe of steel on wood. The version in your hands is a rifled musket, which means the inside of the barrel has grooves carved into it. Those grooves spin the bullet, making it more accurate than the old smoothbore guns, but it also means reloading takes time. And time isn't something generous in battle. The drill sounds simple when shouted. Bite the paper cartridge, pour in the powder, drop the bullet, ram it down, raise, aim, fire. In practice, it's chaos. Powder spills, cartridges rip open wrong. One poor soul swallows half the paper, coughs until he turns red, and drops his musket. The sergeant's face reddens too, but for different reasons. The recruit croaks, "Guess I'll be the first man killed by stationery." This time, everyone chuckles, quietly, with one eye on the officer. Reloading is supposed to take 10 seconds. 10. You're lucky if you can do it in 30 without spilling black powder all over yourself. The man next to you tries to ram the bullet down, but forgets to pour in powder first. His musket ends up with a stuck ball. Useless until someone fixes it. The sergeant groans like he's watching toddlers juggle knives. Bayonet practice follows. A bayonet is just a long, triangular blade you attach to the end of your musket, turning it into a spear. The command is simple: lunge forward and shout. The result is less than intimidating. Half the men stab too high, aiming somewhere above an enemy's head. Others go low, nearly spearing dirt. You nearly impale your own boot. The officer mutters, "The enemy won't fear you. They'll laugh themselves dead first." Hours stretch into a blur of drills. March forward, halt, wheel left, wheel right. The rhythm is meant to weld you into a machine. Instead, it welds blisters onto your feet. A man 2 places down stumbles, knocks over a water bucket, and soaks the shoes of everyone nearby. Someone snorts. "Guess that's our bath for the week." Even the sergeant smirks, before barking another order. Lunch is not the reward you hoped for. Hard biscuits again, the kind you could build a wall with. You tap it against your musket barrel. It makes a noise closer to a hammer than food. One recruit stares at his piece for a full minute before saying, "If the enemy doesn't kill us, this will." Another tries dipping his in coffee, but the coffee is so weak it barely darkens the biscuit. He shrugs and chews anyway. The conversations during breaks drift into dangerous honesty. Someone finally asks, "So why are we fighting exactly?" There's a pause. One man shrugs. "For the Union, I think." Another says, "For my neighbours," they all joined. A third adds, "For the paycheck." You all laugh not because it's funny, but because no one actually wants to admit how unclear the mission feels. It's easier to keep joking than face the silence. Evenings aren't restful. Marching drills continue until the sun sinks. You try to pivot smoothly, but the man behind you bumps hard into your back. He whispers, "Sorry, my boots think for themselves." You want to laugh, but your shoulders already ache from hours of carrying a musket that weighs nearly 10 pounds. For reference, that's like hauling around a small bowling ball on a stick all day. As the sky darkens, soldiers collapse onto blankets. Some whisper about home. One recruit tells his tent mate, "They say it'll be over by Christmas." His friend asks, "Which Christmas?" The pause that follows says everything. Nobody believes the war will end quickly, but hope is free, and free is rare around here. A rumour spreads through camp that one regiment was trained for a week before being sent straight into battle. You count the days you've been here. The number isn't far off. Everyone grows quiet. The drummer boy, yes, still here, taps a nervous rhythm, like he can drown out the fear. The camp doctor makes his rounds, though doctor is generous. He glances at blisters, hands out some chalky pills, and moves on. One soldier asks, "What if I lose a leg?" The doctor shrugs. "Then you won't get blisters anymore." The man groans. "That's not the encouragement I wanted." By now, you can load slightly faster. You can march in something resembling a straight line. And you can lunge with your bayonets without stabbing the ground. It's progress. Awkward, slow progress, but progress. And yet the nagging thought never leaves. This is rehearsal. Out there, it won't be neat lines or timed reloads. It will be smoke, shouting, and bullets you can't see coming. The drills give you muscle memory, but they don't give you courage. That part you'll have to find later. The sergeant yells one last order for the night. You shoulder your musket, feet raw, hands blackened from powder, ears ringing from blank shots. A man beside you mutters, "Think we'll ever be ready?" You don't answer, because you don't know. You just know tomorrow the drills will start again. The first time it rains in camp, you find out the army issued you a tent that leaks like a politician's promise. The canvas droops, the seams drip, and by midnight, you're half soaked, half asleep, and fully regretting your life choices. Someone jokes, "At least we don't need baths now." Nobody laughs, because the mud already crept into every blanket. In daylight, the camp looks like a swamp with uniforms. Rows of tents sag in the muck. Boots stick when you try to walk. And the air smells like a mix of horses, smoke, and latrines. You try not to breathe too deeply. The guy next to you mutters, "Smells like victory," before coughing hard enough to make his point. Meals aren't better. Hardtack again. This time with bonus protein, bugs. You crack one open and find weevils inside, tiny insects wriggling like they paid rent. A corporal shrugs. "Extra meat, boys?" He pops it in his mouth, as if that solves the problem. You're not sure whether to gag or applaud. Salt pork makes an appearance too. Slabs of meat so tough they double as building material. One soldier tries to slice it, and the knife bends. He growls, "If the enemy sees this, maybe they'll surrender." Later, the cook adds beans, which only guarantees that every night turns into a symphony of stomach noises. Water, when you get it, isn't clear. Buckets hauled from nearby streams carry more mud than hydration. Sometimes you see a horse upstream, sometimes worse. You ask the sergeant if it's safe. He says, "Just boil it." Except you rarely have the time. And even when you do, it still tastes like old boots. A man in your unit calls it flavoured mud. Daily chores keep you busy. Digging latrines, hauling firewood, cleaning rifles. Cleaning means scraping gunk out of the barrel, and if you don't, the musket jams. One recruit complains, "I didn't sign up to polish pipes all day." The sergeant growls back, "Better than polishing a coffin." That shuts him up. At night, everyone crams into tents that fit fewer men than advertised. You're shoulder to shoulder, sweaty and exhausted, with no privacy. Someone snores like a sawmill, someone else talks in their sleep. The drummer boy kicks in his dreams, and you wake up with a bruise on your shin. Letters home are the only real relief. You scratch words onto paper by candlelight, ink smudging, telling your family you're fine even when you're not. The man next to you sighs. "I just wrote 3 pages about mud." You nod, because honestly, what else is there to describe? Then comes drill again, even in the camp. Officers insist you keep practicing. March here, march there, load, fire, clean. One soldier mutters, "If the war doesn't come to us, we'll march to it." His friend adds, "Yeah, with holes in our shoes." You all glance down at the soles, already wearing thin. Sundays bring sermons from chaplains. They talk about courage and sacrifice while you're swatting flies. The chaplain tries to read over the noise of coughing and horses snorting. Someone whispers, "Even God must be tired of hardtack by now." When night falls, the camp doesn't quiet down. Fires crackle, men sing off key, and someone's fiddle screeches through the dark. The tunes should lift spirits, but they're mostly out of tune. Still, you lie back, staring at the stars, wondering how long this will last. The truth sinks in slowly. Propaganda promised glory, but the reality is mud, bugs, and biscuits you could use as ammunition. You signed up thinking you'd be a hero. Instead, you're learning how to live in discomfort. The war hasn't even started for you yet, and already it feels endless. The day finally comes, orders arrive, drums beat, and suddenly you're not just a kid with a heavy rifle. You're part of a line stretching across a field. Everyone moves in formation, slow and stiff, like you're all extras in a badly choreographed play. The muskets go off in volleys, not one shot at a time, but a whole row firing together. Clouds of smoke rolling back into your eyes. You cough, you blink, you can't see anything past the man in front of you. Someone mutters, "Guess we'll just shoot at the smoke then." And honestly, that's the strategy. Artillery joins in. The sound isn't just loud, it rattles your chest like a bass speaker turned up too high. Dirt flies, splinters of wood rain down, and you wonder why anyone thought standing in neat rows was a good plan. The officer yells, "Hold steady!" as if steady is possible when the ground itself shakes. Your boots sink in grass slick with dew, then blood. Men slip, stumble, keep going. The formation doesn't stop for anyone. If you fall, someone steps over you. If your musket jams, you're just holding an awkward stick while trying not to panic. A kid in your unit whispers, "This isn't like the drill yard." His friend replies, "Nope, drill yard never shot back." Neither of them laughs, but it's the closest thing to humour you hear all day. Flags wave above the chaos, the only way to know which side you're even on. With smoke everywhere, uniforms blur. You fire when told, reload as fast as you can, and hope the person in your sights isn't one of yours. It's easy to lose track. That's how friendly fire happens. Nobody talks about it, but everyone knows. The smell hangs in the air, a mix of sulphur, sweat, and damp earth. Your throat burns, your eyes sting, and the noise never stops. Drums shouting, muskets cracking, cannon blasts. It's all too much at once. You think, if this is bravery, it's very loud. Sometimes there's a pause. Lines regroup, reload, wait for orders. The silence feels worse. You can hear groans from the ground, the whinny of injured horses, the nervous breathing of men next to you. A soldier behind you sneezes into the powder smoke. He apologizes. No one cares. The order comes again. Advance, you step forward because everyone else does. It's less courage, more momentum. The officer rides by on horseback. shouting commands no one can hear over the gunfire. The horse looks terrified too. You're not fighting for a grand cause in that moment. You're just trying not to drop your musket. Every few seconds you're reloading, biting cartridges, ramming powder, praying you don't fumble. It feels mechanical, like a chore you can't quit. Except if you mess up here, the consequence is immediate. As the sun climbs higher, the field turns into pure chaos. Smoke so thick it's like marching in fog. Men stumbling half blind. Shots whizzing overhead with a sound like angry bees. You duck without meaning to, then feel embarrassed until you see everyone else doing the same. By afternoon, your ears ring so badly you stop hearing commands. You just watch what others do and copy. Fire when they fire, move when they move. Survival isn't about orders now. It's about blending into the line. The battlefield looks nothing like the paintings. There's no clear heroism, no shining moment. Just lines of men walking into clouds of smoke, trying not to be the one who doesn't get back up. And as the day drags on, you realise something chilling. The war still has years left. This is only your first taste, and it already feels like too much. When you get shot, the first surprise isn't pain, it's confusion. Soldiers often don't even realise they've been hit until someone yells, "You're bleeding!" Then you look down, see red soaking through wool, and suddenly your whole body feels heavier. The second surprise? Nobody rushes in with stretchers like in war movies. Most of the time, your friends drag you by the arms, legs, or whatever's still intact. If you're unlucky, you just lie there until the fighting moves past you. More than a few soldiers were found alive the next day, too weak to even shout. If you do get hauled back, the hospital isn't a hospital at all. It's a tent or a barn or an abandoned house. The waiting area? Just dirt. You join dozens of groaning men lined up on blankets. The smell hits you before the sight. Sweat, horse dung, gunpowder, and the sickly sweet stench of blood that's been pooling for hours. One private mutters, "Smells like a butcher shop." Another answers, "At least butchers wash their knives." That's the level of morale. The doctors are everywhere, but not in white coats. No gloves, no masks, just men in blood-stained shirts, sleeves rolled up. They carry saws, knives and probes, like carpenters who wandered into the wrong trade. Germ theory exists, but most surgeons don't buy it yet. Washing hands? That's seen as a waste of time. If you're unlucky enough to be first in line, you don't get anaesthesia. Chloroform and ether exist, but they're expensive and scarce. Instead, a soldier hands you a leather strap. "Bite down," he says, "like that's supposed to help. Someone else pins your shoulders?" The doctor starts sawing, and you realise the strap is the only painkiller you'll get. Whiskey sometimes helps, but the army isn't running a bar. The wounded outnumber the bottles, and doctors drink as much as they hand out. So you hear a lot of men scream themselves unconscious, others faint halfway through, and some stay awake the whole time, teeth grinding down to stubs. The speed is astonishing. Surgeons brag they can cut off a limb in under 10 minutes. Some manage it in 5. One doctor claims his record is 3. Soldiers joke, faster than shaving, slower than dying. The humour's dry, but it keeps you sane. Outside the tent, piles of severed arms and legs grow by the hour. No one buries them right away. There's no time. A soldier limps past the pile and mutters, "Careful where you step." Nobody laughs, but everybody remembers the line. Not all wounds mean amputation. A bullet lodged in your side might earn you a probe, a thin metal rod poked around to find the slug. No anaesthesia there either. Some soldiers say it feels worse than the original gunshot. More than a few die just from the probing. And then there's gangrene. A wound looks fine one day, then turns black, and oozes the next. The smell spreads before the rot does. Fellow soldiers start sleeping farther away. A man once begged his surgeon, "Cut it again." The doctor shook his head. There wasn't enough left to cut. For those who survive, prosthetics await, if you can afford them. Wooden legs with clunky hinges, hooks instead of hands. Entire businesses spring up to make money off ruined bodies. Some soldiers joke, the carpenters are winning this war. It's not just bullets causing injuries. Bayonet stabs, cannon fragments, burns from exploding gunpowder. They all send men to the tent. Tools get wiped on sleeves and reused immediately. Bandages get washed in the nearest creek if at all. A surgeon once said proudly, "My knife has been in 50 men today." Nobody thought that was impressive. Sometimes you don't even make it to the tent. Battlefield medicine includes field dressings, a rag tied tight above the wound. If you're lucky, someone presses down to stop the bleeding. If you're not, you bleed out before the stretcher arrives. More men die in the mud than in the surgeon's chair, and the numbers don't lie. More soldiers in the Civil War die from disease and infection than from enemy bullets. About 2 out of every 3 deaths aren't from combat. They're from the aftermath, which means the enemy isn't always the man across the field. Sometimes it's the saw in the surgeon's hand. A wounded man once asks, "Doc, will I walk again?" The surgeon replies, "Not with both legs." That's the kind of bedside manner you get. Another soldier, waiting his turn, mutters, "I'd rather take another bullet." Nobody argues with him. When you leave the tent, if you leave, you're lighter, missing a limb, missing blood, missing strength. And yet, many are sent back to fight anyway. Crutches, slings, even half-healed wounds don't stop the orders. The army needs bodies more than it needs whole men. So you keep going, patched up with bandages that look worse than the wound itself. The smell follows you for days, a reminder that survival here isn't about glory. It's about enduring pain that no one at home can even imagine. And through it all, the saw keeps moving. You've survived bullets, surgery, and food that qualifies as a hate crime. But now comes the part that nobody trains you for. The brain trying to make sense of it all. The term used back then was soldier's heart. Today we'd call it PTSD, but in the 1860s they thought it was a heart problem. Because of course, why not blame the heart for panic attacks? One general even claimed soldiers just needed more marching to toughen the spirit. Translation: walk it off. Yeah, because that always cures nightmares. Nightmares are common. You close your eyes and see the same battlefield again. The smoke, the noise, the friend who was alive this morning, and not by dinner. Some men refuse to sleep at all, claiming the dreams are worse than reality. The result? Rows of exhausted soldiers who look like they've been on a month-long college exam week. And then there's the moral side. You're shooting at people who speak your language, sing the same songs, and pray to the same God. Some soldiers admit they fired high on purpose, just to avoid hitting anyone. Others said the opposite. They aimed low because kneecaps don't pray. Either way, guilt piles up faster than the hardtack rations. The army has punishments for desertion. If you run away, you risk being branded, jailed, or even executed in front of your unit. Imagine trying to sleep knowing tomorrow's entertainment is your buddy tied to a post. Soldiers joke, cheaper than tickets to the circus, but nobody laughs too long. Conversation around campfires gets awkward. One man says, "I shot 3 today." Another stares into the flames, silent. A drummer boy pipes up, "I don't even have a gun." Everyone pretends that's funny, but the silence afterward feels heavier than the cannonballs. Letters home reveal more than the men admit out loud. A private writes, "I no longer remember what peace feels like." Another says, "The birds sing here, but I don't hear them anymore." These aren't dramatic diary entries. They're casual, like they're describing the weather. The numbness becomes the only way to cope. Small things trigger memories. A backfiring wagon wheel, the crack of wood burning, even the sound of a spoon hitting a tin plate. Suddenly a soldier dives for cover, heart pounding. Friends call it jumpiness. Today we'd call it trauma. Back then, they just told you to man up. And the loneliness. It's not just missing family, it's missing normal life. A soldier once wrote that he missed the sound of his mother's cooking more than his own bed. Someone asked, "What does cooking sound like?" he replied, "not like cannon fire." That shut down the conversation real fast. Soldiers invent jokes about amputations, about lice, about food poisoning. The darker the subject, the more casually they deliver it. It's like watching stand-up comedy in a nightmare. One man, missing 2 fingers, joked, "At least I play the banjo faster now." His friends clapped. Nobody knew if they were clapping for the joke or for him still being alive. And yet, the war machine keeps rolling. No matter how broken the men feel, the orders keep coming. You march, you dig trenches, you fight again. Rest isn't rest, it's just a pause before the next storm. The psychological toll isn't just on the battlefield, it follows soldiers home. Some return unable to farm, unable to work, unable to sit through a church service, without flinching at every cough. Families don't understand. Communities don't want to hear it. The phrase shell shock won't exist for decades, so the men are just called weak, lazy, or drunk. That's the cruel part. You survive, but you're not the same. The war takes pieces of your body, sure, but it also takes whole corners of your mind. And tomorrow, you'll still be asked to stand in formation like nothing's wrong. You'd think the biggest fear of a Civil War soldier was getting shot. Turns out, it was getting hungry, because you will be hungry all the time. The rations are famous and not in a good way. Every soldier knows the menu: hardtack, beans and salted pork. That's it. Day after day, meal after meal, like living in a food-themed prison. Hardtack, in case you're lucky enough to have never seen it, is a cracker so dense it could legally double as building material. Soldiers joke that you don't eat it, you negotiate with it. Some men bang it against the table just to check if their teeth are still good. Others dunk it in coffee until it's soft enough to chew. If you've ever eaten a stale cookie, multiply that by 10 and add bugs. Yes, bugs. Weevils lived in the cracks, and sometimes the little legs were considered extra protein. Beans were common too, boiled until they lost all shape and dignity. You're supposed to feel full, but instead you just feel betrayed. Salted pork, that was the prize ration, but after weeks in a barrel, it was more salt than pork. You'd boil it, scrape off the slime, and still end up chewing on something that tasted like ocean mixed with regret. And let's not forget the bonus ingredients, maggots. Soldiers tell stories of cutting into bacon and finding it moving. One guy claimed he preferred to eat in the dark, so at least he couldn't see what was crawling. His friend replied, "Yeah, but you can still feel it." That conversation ended quickly. Food wasn't just bad, it was scarce. Supplies didn't always reach the front lines, so soldiers had to improvise. Men hunted squirrels, birds, even stray dogs. Sometimes meals turned into contests. Who could catch something first and who had to share it? You'd think sharing a rabbit would bring the unit closer. Instead, it caused arguments over which piece counted as half. Coffee was the one sacred item. Soldiers loved it. A warm cup of coffee meant you were still alive, still human. They drank it at all hours, morning, night, even right before battle. Some units joked that they fought for liberty and beans, but really, they fought for coffee. Of course, the supply ran out often. When it did, they tried roasting anything. Corn, chicory, even dandelion roots. Spoiler, none of it tasted like coffee. Occasionally, soldiers raided farms or stole from orchards. Chickens were especially at risk. One farmer wrote that he stopped bothering to lock his hen house. "The soldiers will get them anyway," he said. A soldier replied, "We're fighting for freedom, yours and the chickens." Nobody laughed, except maybe the soldiers. And then there were the desperate moments. Hunger pushed men to eat leather belts, candle wax, even shoe soles. You'd boil the leather to soften it, then chew like your life depended on it, because sometimes it did. A soldier once wrote, "My belt filled me more than the beans." It wasn't a joke. The smell of camp kitchens didn't help. Imagine hundreds of men cooking beans and pork in open pots, the steam mixing with smoke, sweat, and horse manure. That's your dining experience. Someone once asked what Civil War camp smelled like. The answer: don't ask, just hold your breath. Every now and then a package from home saved the day. Fresh bread, pie or jam, anything that tasted like civilization. Of course, by the time it travelled hundreds of miles it was stale, mouldy or smashed. But even smashed pie tasted better than hardtack. Soldiers guarded these treats like treasure. One man shared his mother's cake, and the entire unit declared it the best day of the war. Food also became currency. A single onion could be traded for tobacco, a cup of coffee, or even a pair of socks. Soldiers joked that onions were worth more than gold. When someone brought one back to camp, it was like showing up with pizza at a college dorm. Instant friends. The irony is, armies spent fortunes on supplies, but the soldiers never had enough. Corruption, poor planning, and bad roads meant that wagons broke down, or food spoiled before reaching the front. Meanwhile, soldiers ate worms out of desperation. And yes, someone wrote about that too. So, what was it like to eat as a Civil War soldier? Miserable. Every bite was a gamble. Would it fill you up, make you sick, or just remind you of home? The answer was usually all of the above, and tomorrow you'd wake up to the exact same plate again. You thought bullets were bad? Wait until you meet the latrine. Disease in Civil War camps didn't just happen, it thrived. More soldiers died from it than from battle, which is kind of embarrassing for the whole idea of war. You signed up expecting rifles, cannons, and maybe a heroic charge. Instead, you got a 4-month relationship with diarrhea. The water was the first problem. On paper, rivers looked clean, flowing, even scenic. But upstream, thousands of men, horses, mules, and wagons were all using the same river for washing, cooking, and dumping waste. That meant every sip was a gamble. One soldier complained the water had a taste of horse about it. His buddy answered, "Yeah, and sometimes mule too. If you wanted fresh water, you had to boil it. But boiling required wood, time, and patience, 3 resources most armies were short on. And when you didn't boil it, you got dysentery, not the polite kind of upset stomach either. Dysentery meant running back and forth to a trench that passed for a toilet. The trench itself was dug shallow, often right next to the tents, because digging deep required effort, and soldiers already hated digging. Imagine lying in your tent at night, listening to someone sprinting past you for the 5th time, muttering curses as they clutched their stomach. That was camp life. Typhoid joined the party too. It spread through contaminated food and water, and the symptoms included fever, weakness, stomach pain, and rashes. Basically, it turned you into a miserable, sweaty mess who couldn't fight. Some regiments had outbreaks so bad, commanders reported losing half their men before firing a single shot. Then there was measles. If you grew up isolated, like many farm boys did, you might never have been exposed before joining. Camps packed thousands of strangers, shoulder to shoulder, and measles jumped from one to another like it had been waiting for this moment. Entire tents fell sick in a week. One recruit joked in his diary, "We enlisted as volunteers, but the measles drafted us all." And smallpox. Yeah, that one showed up too. Some units attempted vaccination, but the technique wasn't exactly modern. It often involved scratching the skin and applying matter from an infected blister. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it spread worse. You'd wake up hoping you got the helpful version. Not exactly the kind of lottery you wanted to play. Doctors were present, but medicine was more theatre than science. They carried laudanum, which was basically opium in a bottle, and whiskey, which doubled as disinfectant and morale booster. If you had fever, the treatment might be bleeding. Yes, draining your blood to balance your humours. If you had infection, they might dose you with mercury, which, fun fact, is poison. One soldier quipped, "If the bullet don't kill you, the doctor will." It wasn't an exaggeration. When doctors ran out of ideas, soldiers turned to folk remedies. They chewed tobacco to fight infection, swallowed vinegar for fever, or ate raw onions to cure colds. Onion breath didn't kill germs, but it did keep tent mates at a safe distance. One soldier bragged he never caught a cough during onion season. His friend replied, "That's because no one wanted to sit near you." Camp hygiene was a myth. Soap was scarce, and washing clothes was rare. Soldiers spent weeks in the same sweat-soaked uniform, crawling with lice. They called them greybacks, and picking them off became nightly entertainment. One man held up his shirt seams and introduced his lice as Company B. Another replied, "Company B is bigger than Company A." It wasn't really funny, but when everyone's itching, you take what humour you can get. The smell of camp was a character of its own. Imagine the mix: rotting food scraps, horse manure, human waste, unwashed bodies, and the constant smoke of campfires. Visitors said you could smell an army before you saw it. One civilian wrote, "The odour was the bugler. Subtle, number, accurate, yes. Flies loved it. They swarmed around food, latrines, and wounds. Some soldiers joked that flies outnumbered men 2-1. You'd try to eat a biscuit while brushing away a dozen buzzing pests. One private sighed, 'At least the flies don't shoot.' Then someone else answered, 'No, but they aim better.' And yet somehow people adapted. Soldiers carved spoons and cups, swapped recipes for hardtack pudding, and compared remedies like neighbours trading gossip. Latrine duty rotated, and no one liked it, but it had to be done. A corporal once tried to skip his turn by claiming he was sick, only to be told, "If you can walk to complain, you can walk to the trench." Disease made soldiers fatalistic. Many believed if a bullet didn't kill them, camp fever would. Letters home often mentioned sickness more than battle. A young recruit wrote to his mother, "I have not seen the enemy, but I have seen more diarrhea than I thought possible." That sentence is somehow both tragic and comedic. Even officers weren't safe. Generals, colonels, chaplains, all fell sick. Leadership didn't shield you from germs. One chaplain, after weeks of nursing the sick, admitted in his journal he had finally joined them. His entry simply read, "Prayed, vomited, slept. Short, accurate, and depressing. Still, camaraderie came out of the misery." When one soldier staggered back from the latrine, pale and weak, his friend handed him the last clean rag they had. "Don't lose it," he said. "It's all we've got." Moments like that, gross, human, absurd, made survival possible. The irony is clear. You expected war to kill you in a blaze of glory. Instead, it tried to kill you with a puddle of bad water. Guns were loud, but germs were quiet, and far more efficient. You probably thought everyone on the Civil War battlefield had a clear idea of why they were fighting. Nope, a lot of farm boys just knew the neighbour's son joined, and now it was their turn. Some Union soldiers said they fought to save the Union, though they couldn't explain what that really meant. Others just said, the recruiter promised steady pay. Spoiler, it wasn't steady. Confederate recruits often claimed they fought for states' rights. Which rights? Usually the one about owning other people, but for a poor farmer, it often boiled down to peer pressure. If you stayed home, neighbours whispered, "He must be a coward." If you enlisted, at least the whispers stopped, until they switched to, "He looks too small for that uniform." Now let's zoom out. The big picture reason was slavery. The southern economy ran on it. The northern economy didn't want it to spread. That tension snapped into war. But here's the awkward part. Many ordinary soldiers weren't thinking in grand speeches. They were thinking, do I get boots that fit this time? In camp, debates popped up around the fire. One soldier might mutter, "I don't see why we're fighting." Another would answer, "Because they shot at us." That usually ended the discussion. Philosophical depth wasn't a common luxury when you were chewing on hardtack that tasted like chalk. Let's explain hardtack again quickly, because it deserves the spotlight. Hardtack was basically a brick of flour and water baked until indestructible. It could last years. Soldiers sometimes had to soak it in coffee just to avoid breaking teeth. If you're wondering, yes, worms sometimes lived inside it. Men joked it was meat rations included. That's not comedy. That's survival rebranded. Speaking of coffee, Union soldiers loved it. Confederate soldiers missed it. When the blockade cut off supplies, Southerners tried substitutes: roasted sweet potatoes, acorns, chicory. None of them worked. Imagine waking up, taking a sip, and thinking, "Yep, tastes like dirt soup." Coffee became morale itself. A soldier once wrote, "I can face the enemy, but not a morning without coffee." Now, what if the war had ended differently? If the Confederacy had won, the United States might not exist as we know it. You'd have two separate countries glaring at each other across a border. Slavery would have lasted longer, maybe decades more. The world might never have seen a United States rise to power. In other words, your favourite Marvel movie franchise might not exist because half the continent would still be arguing about tariffs. And think about the soldiers themselves. Many enslaved men escaped to fight for the Union. They faced double danger. Captured by Confederates meant being executed or re-enslaved. Even within the Union Army, racism followed them. Black regiments often got worse equipment, less pay, and the most dangerous assignments. Yet they still fought. One sergeant reportedly told his men, "You're not just fighting for the Union, you're fighting for proof you belong in it." Kids fought too. Some were official drummer boys, ages 12 to 15, carrying sticks instead of rifles. But in reality, they were often caught in battle. Some picked up fallen muskets when men dropped them. Diaries describe boys bragging about their courage, then writing home about missing their mothers. One 14-year-old wrote, "The bullets buzzed like bees and I wished I was back in the orchard instead." The war didn't discriminate by age. Old men joined too. One grey-haired volunteer said he'd been farming too long and wanted a change of scenery. He lasted 3 months before dysentery sent him home. Not quite the retirement plan he imagined. Rumours spread constantly in camp. Some said the war would be over in 90 days. Others said Britain or France would jump in and save the Confederacy. One soldier noted, "We hear more lies than sermons." Yet those rumours gave men something to talk about besides food, mud, and lice. Everyday survival shaped politics more than speeches did. A man who suffered through typhoid didn't rant about state sovereignty. He ranted about latrine placement. A soldier who got shoes 2 sizes too small didn't argue tariffs. He argued blisters. The grand issues were real, but the daily grind shrank them into background noise. So when you ask, why did they fight? The answers weren't always noble. They were messy, shallow, practical, sometimes contradictory. And if you think soldiers back then were more focused or disciplined, remember, they were mostly teenagers with bad food, no showers, and rifles heavier than their arms. You'd probably complain too. By the end of the war, both sides were exhausted. Ideology kept commanders going, but for the rank and file, survival became the main reason to keep marching. Nobody wanted to be the last man killed in a conflict that already chewed up hundreds of thousands. And yet, here's the odd thing. Soldiers kept writing letters home, filled with hope. They joked about lice, about meals, about mud. They teased each other in campfires. One private said, "If we can laugh through this, we can win through this," which, given the odds, might have been the bravest statement of all. You've survived battles, camp diseases, and the kind of food that could double as a construction material. Now comes the hardest part. Going home, or what's left of home. For many soldiers, home wasn't the same, and neither were they. Some walked back missing an arm, others missing a leg. Prosthetics existed, but they weren't sleek modern ones. They were wooden, clunky, and squeaked with every step. Imagine trying to sneak into church late. Everyone knew because your leg announced you first. Others came home blind. Black powder weapons caused burns, and exploding shells could take an eye in an instant. Families learned to adjust, guiding their sons or husbands around houses that felt familiar, but suddenly full of obstacles. One veteran joked, "At least I don't have to clean my rifle anymore." Nobody laughed too loud, because it was half true. Loss wasn't just physical. Many soldiers never made it back. About 620,000 deaths. That's more than the population of Washington, D.C. at the time. Families often got no body, no grave, just a folded piece of paper and a rumour about where their son fell. Letters became lifelines. Some soldiers wrote their last words whenever they could. Mothers tucked them away, reading them over and over. A few of those letters still survive, and the handwriting shows it. Shaky, rushed, smudged by campfire ash or rain. One soldier wrote, "Tell little Sarah I'll bring her candy when I come home." He never did. Camps were full of talk about death, but not in a dramatic way. It was practical. Two men would argue over who would take care of whose family if they didn't make it back. "Bill, if I don't get through this one, you look after Mary." "Fine, but if I'm gone, you better feed my hound dog." That was soldier insurance. No paperwork, just trust and a handshake. Bodies on the battlefield weren't always buried right away. Sometimes the sheer number overwhelmed the survivors. Shallow graves, hurried markers, or none at all. Nature often did the rest, which is a polite way of saying it wasn't dignified. Many families never knew the exact spot their loved ones ended up. In towns, returning veterans shocked their neighbours. People expected heroes, but got men who jumped at loud noises and struggled to farm again. PTSD wasn't diagnosed then. It was called soldier's heart, or just nervousness. Communities had no idea how to handle it. Some soldiers sat on porches staring for hours, while others drowned their memories in whiskey. Meanwhile, families of the dead leaned on letters and diaries. A father might pass down a son's pocket Bible or a button from his uniform. These objects became the grave markers at home. A widow could hold a button and say, this was his. It wasn't much, but it was something. Even survivors faced new hardships. A one-legged man couldn't plough fields easily. A blind man couldn't trade the way he once did. Families improvised, but poverty spread. Some veterans turned to selling pencils or begging on city streets. In a cruel twist, many passers-by ignored them. Too busy, too uncomfortable. The nation remembered victory, but forgot the cost standing right in front of them. Still, soldiers tried to keep humour alive. One diary mentions a man with a wooden leg racing a friend and laughing when he fell over. Another described two veterans comparing scars like trading cards. "I got this at Antietam." "Well, mine's from Gettysburg. Top that." It wasn't morbid to them, it was coping. The sheer numbers are hard to grasp. 620,000 deaths in a country of just over 30 million. That's 1 out of every 50 people. Imagine your town today. Wipe out half a street, and that's the scale. Every family, every community lost someone. And yet, life went on. Farms needed tending. Shops reopened. The world didn't pause for grief. People adjusted, even if that meant carrying silent pain. Soldiers weren't statues, they were neighbours again. Some managed, others didn't. But all of them left traces. Letters, diaries, memories whispered over dinner tables. By the time the war ended, the country had enough loss to last a century. But instead of vanishing, the pain became part of the national story. Every veteran missing a limb, every widow keeping a folded letter, these were reminders you couldn't avoid. Some soldiers became legends, but not because they planned it. Most acts of heroism looked a lot like instinct or bad timing. Picture a soldier sprinting across a field, tripping in the mud, and somehow dragging a friend to safety. He wasn't trying to be brave. He was just stubborn enough not to let go. Everyday heroism was smaller than the stories you read later. Sharing the last piece of hardtack, giving someone your only blanket on a freezing night, carrying water under fire because no one else wanted to. These moments didn't make headlines, but they kept people alive. One veteran recalled patching a friend's wound with part of his shirt. When asked later if it was painful to rip his only clean piece of clothing, he said, "Not as painful as explaining to the captain why I'm half naked." That's gallows humour, Civil War style. Doctors and nurses saw their own version of bravery. Imagine holding a man's arm while a surgeon sawed it off and still managing to say, "You'll be fine, soldier." The patient usually screamed, fainted, or both. Sometimes the doctor fainted too, which wasn't ideal, but soldiers kept moving forward, even when limping, even when bleeding. A diary tells of a man shot in the leg who refused to leave the line. When ordered back, he said, "Sir, I can still yell loud enough to scare them." That's not strategy, it's sheer stubbornness with volume control. Physical comedy crept into the chaos, a soldier falling asleep on guard duty, tipping backward into a barrel. Another man misfiring his rifle and singeing his own beard. People laughed, then checked to make sure he was still breathing. Heroism sometimes looked ridiculous. A drummer boy, 12 years old, running messages between officers while bullets flew. His drum bounced on his back with every step, making him sound like his own marching band. Did it terrify him? Absolutely. Did he stop? Number. Even survival itself counted as courage. Disease, hunger, and exhaustion killed more soldiers than bullets. So when a man managed to dodge diarrhea, frostbite, and cannon fire all in one season, his comrades called him lucky. He called himself tired. You could see the toll in their bodies. Thin faces, missing teeth, hair that turned grey too fast. Some barely looked 20 when they left, but returned looking 50. One soldier wrote home, "Mother, I am not handsome anymore." His mother probably didn't care. He was alive, and that was enough. Friends carried each other through the worst. Literally carried, fireman-style hauls across fields, sometimes dropping the wounded every few feet to catch a breath. "You're heavy, Jim," one soldier groaned. "Well, sorry for not dying lighter," Jim replied. That kind of banter kept men sane. The bravery wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just waking up the next morning and lining up again. No speeches, no music, just the sound of boots on frozen dirt. And that might be the hardest kind of heroism, the boring, relentless version. Survival meant adapting, eating food you'd sworn you'd never touch, drinking water you knew was suspicious, sleeping shoulder to shoulder with strangers because body heat beat pride. You learned fast or you didn't last. And through it all, soldiers found ways to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because silence was worse. They joked about rats running through camp. They teased each other about snoring. They turned misery into background noise. That's how they survived. One laugh, one scar, one day at a time. The Civil War ended, but for soldiers, it never really ended. You walked home, if you had both legs to walk with. Maybe you arrived in town looking older than your father. People clapped, but you noticed who wasn't in the crowd anymore. Some men went back to farms or shops. They tried to plough fields with missing arms or hammer nails with shaky hands. Tools slipped, accidents happened, and neighbours politely pretended not to stare. Hero status didn't pay rent. Many carried diaries instead of souvenirs. Folded letters stained with sweat and dirt became the only proof of what they'd seen. One man sent home a page saying, "If this is the last you hear from me, tell my brother I still owe him a chicken." Not exactly poetry, but it was honest. Whole families measured the war in absence. An empty chair at dinner, a missing laugh, a child asking why uncle never came back. Some soldiers returned with nightmares so strong they slept on the floor, afraid of beds. Their wives rolled their eyes but also kept the lamps low. The scale of loss was staggering. Around 620,000 dead. That's entire cities erased. And still, it was counted in whispers. Names scratched on courthouse walls, cemeteries with rows of identical stones. Too many families had the same story. He went, and he didn't come back. But here's the thing. Soldiers themselves often processed it with blunt humour. A veteran missing an eye would joke, "At least I don't need a patch for both." A man with a wooden leg tapped it like a drum when the conversation got boring. Not elegant, but effective. The legacy didn't stay on battlefields. It shaped the nation. Military pensions, veteran reunions, parades. Suddenly the idea of remembering sacrifice became a cultural script. And some soldiers leaned in, bragging just enough to earn a free drink. Others stayed silent, avoiding questions like bad debts. Teenagers had left home thinking they'd fight for a cause. They came back realizing they'd fought mostly for each other. Ask them years later why they didn't desert, and the answer was usually, because the man next to me didn't. Generations later, school children would hear about glory, strategy, Lincoln, freedom, but soldiers remembered blisters, spoiled bacon, and the sound of boots squishing through mud. That's history too, less inspiring, more human. The war's memory lived in objects. A cracked canteen passed down as a family heirloom. A uniform jacket with one sleeve missing, stuffed in an attic trunk. These weren't trophies, they were reminders that someone survived, barely. And yes, eventually, it all got simplified into textbooks, speeches, and monuments. They fought bravely, the plaques say. True, but they also itched constantly. They swore about hardtack, and they dreamed of going home. The real answer to what was it like to be a Civil War soldier is simpler. Worse than you imagine, but also more ordinary. It was kids growing up too fast. It was men laughing at each other's bad luck. It was pain, boredom, fleas, letters, and the endless sound of marching. That combination doesn't fit on a statue, but it's the closest to the truth. So when you hear the phrase Civil War soldier, don't picture just uniforms and flags. Picture half-shaved recruits, a drummer boy, too small for his drum, and a campfire conversation where someone says, "I'd trade all this for one clean pair of socks." That's the legacy. Courage tangled with discomfort, sacrifice mixed with sarcasm, and an entire generation reshaped by something none of them really wanted.